I grew up in a little cow town in south central Texas, a little town called Weimar. And we were along Interstate 10, right in the middle between Houston and San Antonio. And so we would get all kinds of people coming into our town, stopping at the gas stations and things like that on their way. But also along that same corridor were railroad tracks. And those tracks went right through our town. And we lived right across the street from the railroad tracks, right across from the street. And so we got used to the sound of trains coming day and night, the sound of them stopping. But there's something else that my family got used to as well. Along that corridor, people trying to make it from Houston to San Antonio, a lot of times they would stop and they would need help. Or they would be riding the trains, not an Amtrak, not a passenger train, but they would be in the boxcars trying to make it a little bit further down the road. And right across the train tracks was my house, and of course the church was right next to us. We lived right next to the church, and my dad was the pastor of the church. And so they would come off these trains, and they would come up the little hill, and they would come to our house and knock on the door. And that they would ask for help. Or they'd go to the church and they knock on the door and they would ask for help. Or if they were driving through town, they would stop somewhere and they would ask someone if someone could help them either get gas in their car or help them find some lodging for the night. And those people were always sent to my dad because my dad was the leader of the ministerium. All the churches in town, these small churches would pool their resources together in order to help other people. And the town thought there was no better person than Colonel Dean to sort all this out. He was a pastor, but he was a colonel before he was a pastor. And so he would listen to people's stories. And he could kind of ferret out which was the real story and which was maybe some lies mixed in there. But we watched him do this. And not only that, but they would come knock on our door. And so they would bring their gallon jugs, like the empty milk jug, and we would fill it up with water from the hose. And then my mom would make some peanut butter and honey sandwiches occasionally, and we'd bring those out. And so we got used to strangers coming to our house. Very used to being hospitable and open-handed as a kid. I didn't even know what we were doing. I just knew we were being humans to other humans. Now, there are cultures in our world that are very open-handed like that. Cultures that have a deep sense of hospitality. There are some cultures that don't have that. Some cultures don't have a deep sense of hospitality. But we're going to read in the story today about Abraham and Sarah that they breathed this culture of hospitality in this pre-modern Eastern world they were in. It would be unthinkable for them to turn a stranger away from their house. It would be unthinkable for them to do that. And because of their hospitality, we're going to see this encounter that they have with complete strangers. Lives are going to change, and the whole direction of the world is going to change. Now, I'm going to read this section from Genesis 18, but you have to realize that we're reading this knowing something that Abraham doesn't know right away. He doesn't know that these strangers are messengers from God. He believes that they're just strangers. And he's actually going to call one of these strangers in this story Lord, but he's not using the term Yahweh or God. He's using the term of just a powerful person. So we're going to start with Genesis chapter 18. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. And you have to realize, Abraham was a very wealthy and very powerful person at this time. He'd actually helped other kings win their battles. He had kings bow down to him. But in his hospitality, in his welcome of the stranger, he immediately puts himself lower than the stranger. Before he even says a word, he bows all the way down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I find favor with you, do not pass by your servant," still putting himself lower. "Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." Now, what we're going to read now following is Abraham is going to do much, much more than what he said he was going to do. Do you ever have somebody in your family who's really, really good at hospitality, and they say, "Come on in for a little coffee and cookies," and you show up and they bring out the Christmas turkey and everything? We all seem to have one of these people in our family that say, "You know what, that's not really big of a deal. Come on over, some cheese and crackers," and there's an entire spread out. That's what Abraham is going to do for these strangers. He just says, "I'll bring you a little water so you can wash your feet, and I'll get you a little bit of bread before you keep on your journey." Abraham hastens to the tent to Sarah and said, "Make quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it and make cakes." 3 measures of choice flour. This is a lot of flour. And not only is he bringing them bread, but he's making them cakes. Then Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant who hastened to prepare it. "Abraham, you did not tell the strangers that you were going to smoke brisket for them. There's a whole barbecue happening now." And he brings not only his choice flour, but the most tender calf that he has. Then he took curds. He took some cheese, some milk, and the calf that he had prepared. And he set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where's your wife Sarah?" And he said, "There in the tent." Again, Abraham doesn't know yet what's going on. Doesn't know that he's encountering messengers from God. And Abraham's welcome of the stranger isn't influenced by knowing who these people are. This is just who Abraham is. He's not doing this out of any sense of duty or obligation. This is the person that Abraham is. And what we don't know is right before his encounter with these messengers, these strangers, Abraham, his son Ishmael, and all the other men in his tribe have just been circumcised. And Abraham's not a young man. Abraham's an old guy. Now, those of you that are married to guys, you might realize, yeah, we get a cold, we go, "Oh, it's terrible. I need to sit on the couch." You know, guys, we kind of wimps like that. Imagine you're sitting there in the heat of the day, trying to recover from a medical procedure that probably wasn't in a hospital, on a very painful part of your body. And he sees these strangers, and he doesn't limp over to them, he runs to them. He could have got his son Ishmael. "Ishmael, go out there and see what they need." Or another servant, "Go out there and see what they need." It would have been an extension of himself, but Abraham doesn't do that. Abraham goes himself because that's who Abraham is. And then he goes to the matriarch of the tribe, the matriarch of the family, doesn't go to another servant or somebody else, goes to the top woman in the tribe and says, "Sarah, I need you to take all the best flour we have and make some cakes." This is deeply personal to both Abraham and Sarah. This is who they are as people. And then he stands by them while they eat. He has conversation with them. His hospitality and his welcome leads to room for conversation, which opened up space, I think, for one of the most important questions ever asked in Scripture. And the question is, where is your wife, Sarah? Without the welcome, open-handed hospitality, that question doesn't get asked. And it's one of the most important questions ever asked in Scripture because God has made a promise to Abraham and Sarah that they would have descendants, that they would have a large family, and that family would be a blessing to the entire world. Because of that hospitality, because of that open-handedness, conversation takes place, and the strangers, these messengers from God, speak so that Sarah can hear. Then one of them said, I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now, Sarah's gonna have a reaction to this news, and it's a normal reaction. It's a reaction that any of us would have if we were in Abraham and Sarah's shoes. She laughs. Abraham and Sarah are old. They're old. There's absolutely no way that this is physically possible. She laughs because it's absurd. It's an absurd statement. But the messenger hears Sarah laugh, and Sarah tries to cover it up. The Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? First of all, why did he ask Abraham? You know, like, come on, seriously? I mean, Abraham's probably like, okay, we've been married for like 70 years, but I still don't get her. I don't know what she's doing half the time, you know? They ask Abraham. And they continue, is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time, I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son. But Sarah denied, saying, I didn't laugh, for she was afraid. He said, oh, yes, you did laugh. And God has the last laugh, right? It's a joyful, wonderful laugh. It's not a laugh of judgment or I told you so laugh. It's a joyful, wonderful laugh, and I bet you Sarah laughed that way too. The Lord dealt with Sarah as he said, and the Lord did for Sarah as he promised. Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age. At the time of which God had spoken to him, Abraham gave the name Isaac to his son, whom Sarah bore him. And the whole story starts with a welcome, an open-handed welcome to a stranger. Abraham's stance in the world was one of being open-handed, and that open-handed welcome changed the world. Sarah became a carrier of the promise and gave birth to Isaac, who became the father of Jacob, who was named Israel, and a nation is born. And you and I, all of us, are in this space and watching online because of that welcome. The world has changed. I wonder what would happen if Abraham looked over at those strangers and said, you know what, guys, I'm healing from a medical procedure. Can you come back tomorrow? Or just didn't welcome them at all, just was closed-fisted and didn't do anything, didn't talk to them. But it seems impossible for Abraham to do that. It's not in his nature. It's not in his nature. He knows who he is, and God knows who he is. And Abraham over and over and over again demonstrates his open-handed welcome. Abraham and Nahor took wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran and the father of Milcah and Ishka. Now Sarai was barren. She had no child. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast this week, we're going to unpack these couple verses in some pretty deep ways. You're not able to do that now unless you got another 40 minutes. Nope? All right. But check out the podcast. But one of the things that we find out is that Sarai, it's known that she's barren. Somehow it's known that she cannot have a child, and Abraham marries her anyway. And you know what that means for Abraham? He will never be a father. He chooses to marry Sarai before the promise, and he knows that he's never gonna be a father. Because Sarai, if he doesn't marry her, Sarai is gonna be left all to herself. And it's a dangerous, dangerous, dangerous world for her. Abraham knows how to sacrifice. He sacrifices his future for someone else. And God can work with someone who knows how to sacrifice. In fact, God seems to work best with people who practice sacrificial love. God seems to really want to work with people who are open-handed, because God knows that open-handed welcome changes the world.